Hello everybody, my name is Asterisk. Every now and again I might do sort of these short audio podcast logs that, every now and again if I have something I feel like I want to talk about, I'll talk about it. Something that I might do just, casually, anytime the moment hits right. Specifically when I'm out and about, on the road and stuff like that, I can just pretty much just pull out, my mobile device and just start recording just as I am now and just really vent and get my feelings out there. So Final Fantasy XIV Online and WoW. Now these games have been they're talked about a lot right now. And a lot of it definitely does have to do with certain streamers and online personalities now transitioning because they used to be WoW players like a lot of Final Fantasy players used to be, and they're disappointed with the direction the game is going, the development progress of the game, and how it's changed, and how certain head developers of Blizzard have pretty much either, I guess you could say, retired or walked away or got rid of one way or another. And, it's a sad thing to hear because, I got my start playing MMORPGs off of the Blizzard household name. My first PC wasn't necessarily mine, it was my father's, but it was capable of running Diablo 2. And I got only into playing that game because my friend let me borrow his disc. I think he had like an extra. And that was sort of my foray into the Blizzard MMO or gaming landscape. I started by doing tryst runs. If anyone's familiar with what those are in Diablo 2, it's basically like a strategy. Basically, you run this one location and you just grind up, and then eventually you hit max level and you can go to harder difficulties in the Diablo progression scheme, and you go from there and you get better gear, etc., etc. That ARPG stuff, anyone's familiar with from things like Path of Exile, it kind of started in that realm of the Diablo landscape first before becoming something so common within that genre. But yeah, it's unfortunate thing to hear because the next game I ended up playing was World of Warcraft, and I was lucky enough again that my father's PC could run that too. And World of Warcraft was a game that really changed things for me because I was used to playing adventure games, but I wasn't used to the fact that a living, breathing world could possibly have so many other people in it who aren't just NPCs, but they're people just like you or me, just walking around doing their own missions and quests, and you're no longer the center of the universe. Your character is within story, but in terms of the overall geographical ecosystem of the game, everyone else is just kind of like you. They're an adventurer. They have a class in their head. They probably have a story. They have a starting zone. There's a certain race that starts in a certain select city, and it was a very immersive experience. And I have some very memorable memories from that game. I remember playing as a night elf hunter and getting my first pet, which was like, I think a night saber. And my friend told me that I have to try and get to Stormwind, and I was like, okay, I have to figure out how do I get there. And, I took a boat from Darnassus, and then I ended up in some sort of like coastal city, and then I was in the swamplands, and my night saber got killed by an alligator that was like 20-30 levels above me. And I remember feeling just so heartbroken when it happened because I thought I lost my pet, but then I found out, like, once I'd reached Stormwind, or I was in Elwyn Forest, I saw in my hotbar there was something called Revive Pet, and I clicked it, and my pet was back, and I was really, really happy that, this game was at least very forgiving in that aspect, because in some ways, I know there were previous games like World of Warcraft that were like EverQuest that were very hardcore or very rudimentary, and their approach was very raw, for lack of a better term. And World of Warcraft came along and said, we're going to ease these systems a little, and things got better. That's why when I hear people talk about things becoming easier, I don't think they become easier. I think they become more streamlined. Because I think there are a lot of things in video games that used to be a common thing that we used to just do and accept, and it actually just got in the way of the fun or playing the game, etc., etc. And so that's why I think that these debates about changing things, there are some people who are very hardcore, what's the term? They're hardcore, I guess you could say traditionalists, like they're like, like purists. Purist is the best word to use, where things have to be exactly the same or it might lose its identity, but I don't know. I think it kind of depends, you know, obviously, like, I have this discussion with friends about fighting games and stuff like that and how they've changed, and when I really think back to the execution demanded in certain fighting games, some of it was, you know, I don't think that necessarily is what made those games special. I think what made those games special had more to do with the presentation and the amount of characters we didn't have to pay DLC for, etc., etc. And so, you know, change is always a discussion or an argument that can go back and forth, but I think it really just comes down to what an individual person can subjectively digest, you know. But anyway, going back on topic, yeah, so after my journey, I reached Stormwind, and, you know, I started questing in that area, and eventually I met up with my friend. He was like also like I think he had like a paladin on the server, and then eventually he made a Night Elf Rogue, and we started leveling together, and one of our favorite zones to quest in together was Stranglethorn Vale, when I got high enough level, and it was so fun just ambushing Horde and stuff like that, and getting into conflicts left and right, and having to go back to Stormwind to call in backup so that we could clash with the Horde, and almost dying in those engagements. It's, you know, a lot of stories, and I'm sure if someone wanted to, and this is just an idea, if someone wanted to write a storybook of stories that encounters and situations people have had in World of Warcraft, I'm sure someone could do it. I know there's a YouTuber named Preacher who he goes over World of Warcraft stories, or at least he used to. I don't know if he still does, and I derive a lot of entertainment in hearing about everyone else's different MMO experiences. But World of Warcraft, I think, for a lot of people, was one grand story that it's unfortunate to see just where the game has developed and progressed, either you know, in terms of mechanical gameplay, in terms of narrative, etc., etc. So when it came to the game, I really enjoyed a lot of my immersive experiences, but I think that in terms of a lot of my, I think in terms of my immersive experiences, I enjoyed it, and I think in terms of my story experiences, I didn't always quite understand everything that was going on, but it was okay. You know, most people just, you know, I read the quest details because I cared about that stuff, but like, I'd probably say I'm more well-read now on World of Warcraft lore than I ever was or cared for when I was like 12 or 13. I'm 28 now, but yeah, I've had a lot of time to catch up on at least the finer bread and butter bits of how the story goes. But yeah, in terms of back then, because I started playing maybe a little bit before Burning Crusade, up to now, I think the last time I played was Battle for Azeroth. I remember I pre-ordered it, and I don't think it was worth the money, sadly. I've never been, again, I'm not someone who's ever been hardcore. I used to derive entertainment and value from the little things. Getting into certain skirmishes in certain like contested zones. I remember there was this one zone or something that took place in the desert. I don't know if it was Gajestan or something. I can't remember. We had like a Western showdown with another group of Horde members there, and it was just a back and forth. Again, I almost died there. It's those little things that I derive entertainment for in my MMO experiences, and WoW had an abundance of those. But when talking about the direction things have gone now. I'm not like a super duper expert, you know. I'm not going to talk about numbers and statistics. I can only really talk about my impressions, because again, this is kind of an off-the-cuff vlog here. I would probably say that it's unfortunate that things have kind of changed in a way where the experience doesn't the experiences that I cultivated in the past don't hold as much novelty as they did back then. And sometimes I wonder if, when talking about bringing back something like vanilla WoW, if it was really like, because I think about, again, all the things that you had to put up with back then, you know, in terms of like having to do certain questing structures, or you know, certain things that had to do with just forming parties, the behavior of the player base and stuff like that. Because when talking about the social aspects of the game, I feel like my entire experience playing WoW has always been kind of a mixed bag. Like, I met some very good people, and I met some really, really big jerks. And I think that's one of the few things that, you know, when I think about having a blight on my experiences, it was really only ever really the player base and the people I met that really made or break the experience for me. And I think a lot of that has to do with the systems that kind of stand in opposition to Final Fantasy XIV, because everything in Final Fantasy XIV Online, by comparison, is there to kind of encourage people to realize that you're all on the same team. You're all the warrior of light. This isn't about Horde versus Alliance. This isn't a faction on faction sort of altercation. You are all in it together to fight back against the darkness, the proverbial darkness, you could say, that is coming back or returning. Without me, you know, spoiling anything in Final Fantasy XIV's narrative and story, for anyone listening who's unaware, I'm a max level player in Final Fantasy XIV Online. I've completed the Realm Reborn quest arc. I've completed Heavensward. I've completed, I forget these names. Stormblood, there we go. Oh my gosh, I almost said Storm Rage. Then Storm Rage. And then I completed Shadowbringers, you know, and everything in all the systems in Final Fantasy, by comparison, when I think back to now, help cultivate a very positive, or at least optimistic and open sort of culture in the Final Fantasy XIV social sphere. When I really think back to my time in World of Warcraft, I did meet players who were willing to look out for the little person and help new players sort of learn things. But so much of the game, when you got to a certain point in WoW, again, as someone who is, you know, quite casual, there was just some people you'd meet where, like, you'll meet people in any game who are always going to be a certain archetype of player, okay? I'm not saying you can't be competitive or professional and stuff like that, but I do have a problem where that professionalism turns into elitism, and that elitism projects itself visibly, and it toxically contaminates the water. That's my issue. I don't have a problem with people who are ambitious and striving to be the best, and they're trying to be accomplished and find their way forward. I just don't like people who do that and they punch down. That's my issue. Like, I think if you really are the champion you're trying to be, or you see yourself as the champion that you are, then why do you have to condescendingly either talk down to players, take advantage of players, cheat players, abuse, players? Final Fantasy XIV kind of like eradicated sort of all that stuff that I actually had to deal with being a new player in World of Warcraft, where sometimes I didn't know what gear was relegated to what stats, and what abilities do what, and just generally having a lack of knowledge. You know, like, again, I've been in countless guilds in World of Warcraft, and they've been kind of meh. to be honest, the number of ones that I've had to jump from group to group, and that's generally because sometimes they were just too big. That's another thing that I'm gonna have to like get into and talk about, is that I sometimes think that people don't realize and recognize that, like, if you build something like an organization or a company or any sort of team or group, you have to be able to facilitate you know, a certain level of cohesion and communication and equal focus and representation with every member in that group. But if you just create like these very giant big Zerg guilds where it's like hundreds of people and blah blah blah, it's kind of like people just get kind of lost in the shuffle. And you know, that's one of the reasons why you need to hire like lower management who keeps an eye on newer players and is willing to be there for them and say hi for them and make them feel like they're seen and stuff like that. I didn't really have a whole lot of that when I played World of Warcraft. Because I remember, in fact, being in a guild where I had a max level player invite me to his guild. I joined, and I may have joined mostly for the benefits, to be very honest, but you know, he was barely ever there. He'd kind of just come into chat, say, hey, what's up, and then do high level content by himself. And there would be fighting and arguing and altercations in the guild itself. And eventually the whole guild dissipated because there was no attention to it. He didn't, you know, it was kind of like, why build this big group, this organization that you're just going to kind of leave there? Like, is it just to have the ego boost that you own something? Because it's like you're catering to people who are part of your unit. But anyway, you know, on the other hand, in Final Fantasy, like the first in Final Fantasy, they're not called guilds, they're called FCs. But the first FC I was a part of, I was invited to it as by someone who was giving me like a refer a friend thing. I didn't actually know them. They just saw me walking around one of the city-states and they invited me, and then I got benefits and they got benefits when I started paying a subscription for the game. And from there on, I didn't really interact with that guild all too much, because again, it's kind of difficult. Like, if you're not someone who has a very gregarious, extroverted, put yourself out there personality, which is just something some people don't have, it's not their fault, then it can be very difficult when you join something and everyone else in that group kind of, you know, it's kind of, they're all hooked up, they all have history, they all have everything going on with one another. They have, you know, they have a level of camaraderie with one another that you don't share with them, and they don't make it very easy to insert yourself into the things they're doing. And when, you know, there are events that they sometimes held in this first FC I was in, and I'm not going to say what their name is, but basically, you know, the only event they had were just like trivia night. And that's it. And I'm just like, that's it? Like, trivia night? Come on now. You know, where's the raiding? Where's the treasure hunts? Where's the, you know, where's the triple triad tournaments? You know, like, where's all that stuff? And so, yeah, eventually I ended up leaving the guild, leaving the FC, and then joining my current FC. And I've been with that FC for almost 4 or 5 years now. And that's generally because, you know, the people in it kind of have been open, receptive when I've needed help. They've given me help in, you know, a few places, and obviously it hasn't been perfect, and I've had my issues here and there. But generally speaking, you know, it's felt like a home, you know. And so I think that's something that Final Fantasy has offered me that, you know, World of Warcraft has kind of struggled. Like, I feel like all the time in World of Warcraft, I've got lost in the shuffle. And that's one of the reasons why I've always kind of had this dream that, like, a lot of the friends that I've had in the past played online games, because it would have been so amazing if we could have played, like, MMOs together and stuff like that. But not everyone has that luxury. You know, I came from, again, a console background. I competed on things like GameBattles.com. I used to play in the Halo 3 ladder. I played in the Gears of War ladder. I was not that great of a player, and I wasn't that great of a leader of the team I was on, and there was a lot of stuff that I wish I'd known so that I could have made better decisions and I could have taken the team a little bit farther, but yeah, you know, like playing in that environment on consoles and stuff like that. Yeah, I feel like I wish I could have had that online, because again, I don't think I've ever been the greatest at networking and making friends and stuff like that. But if I had my friends and stuff like that who are all PC players who I know in my actual life and stuff like that, I feel like I could have had amazing experiences. So I'm really jealous of people who actually have that. But yeah, like when I think about what makes my time playing an MMO fun, I think it's definitely it's not just the grind and the leveling and the story that I enjoy, but it's also just the type of people you meet. And I think you can meet a lot of fun people in Final Fantasy. Now, that's not to say I haven't found jerks in Final Fantasy, because jerks are everywhere. But I do think that the ecosystem of Final Fantasy is built to sort of discourage that rather than encourage it. And that's because I think World of Warcraft tends to be a much more competitive environment, and so it kind of brings out a more sort of primal aspect to us that has to do with like being kind of very antagonistic, especially since the game is about being antagonistic to the other half of the player base in general, in terms of the characters and the story and stuff like that. And I mean, that stuff is not inherently bad. There's nothing inherently bad about that. It's fun, but it does, I think, muddy the waters a little bit in how people look and treat one another and stuff like that. And how, in opposition to how in Final Fantasy, everybody is considered a warrior of light. Everyone is considered, you know, the heroes who are trying to fight for the good of the realm and stuff like that. So yeah, those are my thoughts generally about my time playing both games. It's very unfortunate that WoW has become what it is now, because again, I enjoyed logging onto WoW for PvP. I enjoyed logging onto WoW for the cool raids. Like, I remember the first time I someone in the trade chat was like looking for someone with item level such and such to do ICC, and I was just like, well, my item's level's that, and I don't mind. So I messaged them and I was like, I'll do ICC, and then they let me in, and then all of a sudden I enter the group and everybody's analyzing my gear, looking at the numbers, what I'm wearing, and the stats. They're like, take this, you got to put this and this, and you got to take this and this, and they weren't being mean. They were just suggesting things. These guys they were okay. They were just suggesting, oh, you should wear this and have this and put this and this. But again, I've had other situations in World of Warcraft where, again, I've joined guilds, and they're all nicey, but then raid night, when things aren't going as planned, the leader gets fed up, and then his girlfriend has to come on the mic and tell everybody else how unhappy he is. Because we're doing a casual learning run and everyone is exhausted and tired, and because we can't break through this content, it ruined his day. And in that same guild, having to deal with, someone who was, acting pretty charitable and nice to me, and then when I couldn't perform very well in PvP, as someone who didn't PvP seriously all that much, just absolutely raging at me because I can't execute. I wasn't able to execute on his commands in the way he wanted and stuff like that. World of Warcraft, again, I've had some very romantic, romanticized fantasy experiences in that landscape that were almost things I'd almost like to write down in some gallant storybook and stuff like that, and maybe even be like a bedtime story to a little kid and whatnot, because all the adventures you go through Azeroth, I think, are something worth telling to maybe a young child before bed and stuff like that, minus the cursing and the raging and the trolling. But at the same time, when talking about the community aspect of things, from a social perspective, it's been very hit or miss, anecdotally, for myself. And Final Fantasy has changed that for the better. This is why, you know, I think there are a lot of people as of now who are kind of like, why is it that, you know, there's a new influx of players that seem to be coming from World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy XIV, and the question is, why is it such a big deal that they're coming here? Why are Final Fantasy players freaking out? And it's because most Final Fantasy players in many ways came from other MMOs, mostly World of Warcraft, and they likely have very, you know, mixed experiences when it's come to the player base and the type of ecosystem. You know, it's kind of like it's almost kind of like having the barbarians move into the castle or the kingdom. You know what I'm saying? It's like they kind of live a certain way and behave a certain way, act a certain way, and it feels uncomfortable. You know, it's just a discomfort thing about, you know, we don't want things to change. We don't want, you know, what we've got going here to shift, because I think for a lot of Final Fantasy players, it's kind of like, we're not like over there. You know what I'm saying? Over here, you know, we have kind of a utopia going on. It's not the most perfect utopia, but it's like everyone is kind and sweet and blah blah blah, and they're scared of that changing. And, you know, I think their concerns are quite valid, you know, but I think I'm one of those people who believes in a lot of the thematic tales and narratives that the story of Final Fantasy tells, which is to be open-minded, have hope, and give people a chance, because that's what a lot of things in the Final Fantasy XIV MSQ are really about, you know, about humanizing people and taking a chance on them no matter how grim. You know, that is what it means to be a warrior of light. And that's why I think with all these new people coming into the game, you know, who are kind of abandoning their ship, I think offering them some sort of refuge to try something different, given that they behave themselves, is not really a problem at all. You know, we can't allow our fears to prevent, you know, we can't allow our fears to overtake potential opportunity, you know? I think that's what, you know, life is always about, sort of overcoming fear rather than letting it control us. And we know this through countless struggles and trials and tribulations in the Final Fantasy XIV storyline and MSQ, and we've defeated countless villains and bosses that are almost fear incarnate, and they are being controlled by their carnal desires, and I don't think we should give in to that. You know, we're much better than that over here, and those who like our game will stay, and, you know, those who can't handle our game will catch a ban. It's just that simple. So that's the way I look at it. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I would probably say, I feel like I've said that so much, I'll probably say, I don't know, maybe I'm going crazy here. But Final Fantasy XIV, I think, is a lovely game. It's actually, from A Realm Reborn onto, you know, until, you know, the current Shadowbringer story arc, I think it's become one of my favorite Final Fantasy games of all time, very neck and neck, if not ahead of Final Fantasy VII. And in general, it might be one of my favorite games of all time. And that's a very giant claim, but it's just true. It's just the way this game touches you at its most momentous, heroic, majestic, magnificent moments has really meant something to me that, you know, I haven't encountered in a, you know, in a very long time in my, you know, my adult gaming history. You know, I haven't encountered something like it before. A lot of it holds so much meaning to me. The characters hold a lot of meaning to me. The stories hold a lot of meaning to me. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that, you know, people over in the World of Warcraft section of the building are just not having those experiences anymore, and they feel the need to kind of abandon ship. But I think if they come over to our game and they just give it a try, and they endure and, you know, go through the story and just experience it raw and give it a chance, there's something here for everybody to enjoy, you know. And you know, it's a pretty updated modern game anyway. I'm not saying World of Warcraft isn't updated and modern, but like, I'm kind of surprised that, you know, there hasn't been like a WoW 2 and we didn't have to buy like a new disc and install it, and it's much more modernized and stuff like that. Blizzard has, like I'm not saying WoW doesn't look good. I'm just saying that there are some things about it that I feel like mechanically the developers had to take certain liberties with like a 2001 system, you know. But that's just me. I'm no expert. But yeah. So those are my thoughts. For all you who are listening to this, thank you for listening up to this point. I know it's gone on for like 30 minutes now. When I have another topic to talk about, I'll talk about it, you know. If anyone is interested, I am in Final Fantasy XIV Online. I'm a player by the name of Alerica Alcyone. I'm on the Cactar server, and generally I don't really have a specific job class I play right now, but I think I am aiming for Endwalker to play either like White Mage or Paladin. I have basically every DPS class almost maxed besides Monk, which is ironic because Monk was my first class, and I really do enjoy Monk, just gameplay wise. But yeah, I kind of alternate and jump. Again, I play for the job classes and the leveling and the story. I'm not a hardcore Savage Raider. I'm very casual. In fact, I find most competition to be kind of, I don't know, nonsensical to me, unless like it's against friends or people of personal interest, you know. That's why it's hard for me to play ranked or any sort of competitive game unless there's an emotional tether or there's a reward that I want. If I don't have those things, I'm just not interested in competing. I think it's overrated. But anyway, yep, thank you for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.